Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. This is my final prediction for David Haye vs Tony Bellew 2, the rematch. Now, I'm sure in fight week we will cover this in more detail. We'll probably cover it extensively on the podcast. Patreon followers will get a gambling odds special on the weekly Patreon gambling video that goes up. We'll probably do a weigh-in video, etc. But I wanted to get the prediction up nice and early and get my thoughts on where I stand in this fight. Now, I think when you sit down to do a prediction video for this fight, there are two ways of going about it. Number one, you can slave over the first fight, you can talk about what happened in the first fight, and you can make a prediction based on that. Number two, you can completely eradicate the first fight from your memory. You can write it off as something of limited relevance going into the second fight, and you can talk about the rest of the fighters' careers prior to that second fight when making your prediction. It is potentially going to be towards to my detriment, and I know that, but in terms of the approach I'm going to adopt in talking about this fight and predicting this fight, I'm going to be doing the latter. I'm not going to be focusing on that second fight. Sorry, on that first fight. The reason for that, I believe the first fight is hard to summarise as a piece of evidence. For me, David Haye comes to the ring clearly injured. I believe from his ring walk through to his first round, you can see that David Haye is not David Haye. And I'm not saying David Haye is not the fighter he was 5 years ago. I'm saying David Haye isn't even the same fighter who beat Arnold the Cobra Djurgaj, or David Haye isn't even the same fighter who beat up Mark the Mori. You know, you can see that he has declined even since those fights. Now, as we know, by the time this fight happened, there was substantial press coverage on Fight Week about David Haye having emergency surgery to prep himself due to an injury sustained. So, for me, I buy into that David Haye entered the ring injured. I believe that David Haye was injured to the point that he was less of a fighter than he was even against Demori and Djurgaj. However, I still believe that David Haye was en route to winning a clear decision. For me, he was winning the vast majority of the rounds in the first half of the fight before that injury became aggravated in the second half of the fight. Now, long-time followers of David Haye know that David Haye's body giving out is, of course, a massive, massive risk factor in any David Haye fight. How many injuries, how many pullouts, how many excuses have there been over the years? But my point is that David Haye, who in my belief entered the ring with a substantial injury, and David Haye, who was fighting the worst I have ever seen David Haye fight by quite some margin, was still doing enough to beat Tony Bellew prior to that injury becoming aggravated. People who disagree with my assessment, people who support Tony Bellew in the first fight in the rematch, will correctly point out that Tony Bellew's tactic in this fight was to take the fight late. Tony Bellew's tactic in this fight was to drag the older man, the man with the injury problems, into the deep water, make the going get tough, and see David Haye's gas tank empty and his body fall apart. And fair play to them. That is a very, very fair analysis. I can't disagree with that. I can't tell you that I think Tony Bellew's tactics were anything but, and that was probably the right tactic to employ. However, whilst that is a good and effective tactic to be used against David Haye, I still don't believe it would have been effective but for the catastrophic injury that Haye aggravated in the middle of the second half of the fight. Would Tony Bellew have come on strong anyway? I'm not so sure. You know, Tony Bellew constantly refers to David Haye's poor stamina, and Tony Bellew constantly refers to the fact that David Haye was never going to be strong in the second half of the fight. I actually think there's equal questions about Tony Bellew in the second half of the fight. I saw in that fight Tony Bellew up against a David Haye who could barely even walk, struggling to close the show. It took Tony Bellew 4 or 5 rounds to close the fight after David Haye became injured. I saw Tony Bellew gas on several occasions when he was trying to take David Haye out. I saw... there was even one of those rounds after David Haye aggravates the injury where you can even make a case that David Haye wins the round on one leg. look, I've been guilty of writing Tony Bellew off time and time and time again. And since I started this channel, there is no fighter I have more badly underestimated than Tony Bellew. And, maybe he'll make a fool out of me yet again. But for me, if you're picking Tony Bellew to win this fight second time round, you're relying on David Haye being in as bad a physical condition for this second fight as he was in the second half of the first fight. And I think on the balance of probability, that's unlikely. Certainly not impossible, but I think it's unlikely. And I suspect that what happened in the first fight will not happen again going into this second fight. Will David Haye have niggles? Will there be signs of age? Will he truly be a 12-round fighter? Probably not. But I do believe he should have enough to take care of Tony Bellew. I believe that we will see a lighter David Haye. I believe we'll see a David Haye who's less wild and less swinging, probably because he's better balanced going into this fight. And I believe we should probably see Tony Bellew getting taken out by David Haye. Now, I said this the first time, and I got it hopelessly wrong. I'm diving in feet first the second time again, which is often a formula for complete disaster. And, if I get this one wrong again, I'm going to have to ban myself from doing pre-fight prediction videos for any future Tony Bellew fights, I guess. Because clearly I just can't make a correct prediction when it comes to Tony Bellew. But for me, without wanting to discredit Tony Bellew, who did perform very, very well in the first fight, without wishing to discredit Tony Bellew, if I look at it in the cold, hard light of day, I have to say that I credit Tony Bellew's victory in the first fight largely to David Haye's injury. And I don't believe a repeat will be on the cards unless David Haye is injured to that same catastrophic extent as he was in fight one. David Haye, for what it's worth, actually answered a lot of questions. People have always questioned David Haye's heart. People have always questioned whether David Haye has that dog in him. People have always questioned Haye when the going gets tough. And I actually think Haye answered a lot of those questions in the first fight, despite it being the worst he's ever looked. That was the worst we've seen of David Haye. He could have quit. He could have been stopped. But no, he went out like a warrior. He refused to give in. He actually took a hell of a lot of punches from Tony Bellew and really at no point looked like he was going to be knocked unconscious by Tony Bellew's punches. I think despite the fact it was very disappointing, the nature of the injury, Haye deserves some credit. Not dissimilar to how Vladimir Klitschko deserves credit for his loss against Joshua, where Klitschko sort of, took a beating, kind of kept coming, didn't give up when the going got tough, went out on his shield, etc. I kind of think of this performance from David Haye in the same light. I do believe the reason that David Haye's boxing was so off in terms of his inaccuracy, in terms of some of the swinging, was because of that Achilles injury. I can imagine that an injury like that would be hugely detrimental to a fighter like David Haye, who relies on being balanced and being explosive and coming in and out of range and throwing punches from distance. As for Tony Bellew, let's give him a bit of credit. He showed improved boxing fundamentals for me in the first fight. His elusiveness was improved. His defence was improved. I actually think that he showed a good chin in the first fight. Maybe his punch resistance has improved. Now he's not having to cut weight to make a weight division. I don't believe David Haye caught him with a full power David Haye punch, because I believe Haye's power was affected by the injury that he was carrying going into the fight. But nevertheless, Bellew deserved a lot of credit. What I struggle to see is whether Tony Bellew has the calibre of offence to beat a real David Haye. Because for me, if you look at power, I don't believe he's got the power to hurt David Haye. I don't believe he could hurt David Haye with power in the first fight, despite the fact David Haye was so injured. Has he got the jab? Has he got the combinations? Has he got the general boxing attributes to beat a fit David Haye? I suspect not. But let's see. If Tony Bellew gets the victory again, what a real rocky story that is. And I think he'd have to go down as British boxing's biggest ever overachiever. I really do. And he'd deserve immense credit. know a lot of people are kind of on the fence on this fight. I, for one, am looking forward to it. Maybe it's not top class heavyweight boxing. Maybe it is more WWE than boxing. But I'm falling for the hype. I'm looking forward for it. And once again, I'm Team Haye going into the fight. I'm expecting David Haye to right the wrongs of the first fight. I'm expecting him to conclusively show that the first fight was an anomaly due to that injury. And, we shall see. Let me know your thoughts. Am I underestimating Tony Bellew again? Am I overestimating David Haye again? Do you see the fight differently, or do you agree with my assessment? Please leave a comment in the section below. If you've enjoyed the content, please hit the thumbs up. If you're new or you haven't already done so, please press subscribe. As always, many thanks for tuning in.